I'm sure we all get it wrong all the time.
Of course.
So I think marketing is so ambiguous and so is strategy that we get it wrong all the time. And if I think about any other function in the business, everyone is a closet marketer. So I think probably the right question to ask is, do we ever get it right? Really?
Oh, okay.
Probably more so. But I think if you're focused on doing the basics well, getting stuff out the door, I think that's heaps better than striving for perfection and trying to get it 100% right.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Growth Distillery as we ring in 2024, having a chat to some of Australia's emerging and established marketing leaders. In partnership with the Marketing Academy, they have handpicked some of the brightest minds in the country, where we talk about the unfiltered versions of some of our professional lives. I'm joined by Jade Lish. Jade, lovely to have you here. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And as you guys have seen, I'm going to talk to the A side and then I'm going to ask Jade about the B side. But on face value, Jade is the head of marketing for v2food. They are Australia's leading plant-based protein company. But Jade has held numerous brand and marketing roles across top-tier consumer goods brands, including Mattel, Johnson & Johnson, Goodman Fielder and Mars. So a really illustrious career. I'm very, very lucky to be having a chat to you, mate. But what I wanted to call out, unlike some of my other guests, there was quite a bit of you on your socials. And what I loved about reading through your professional persona, even through LinkedIn, was that I got a little bit of your exuberance and gregariousness. And having had a chat to you a couple of times before this, it's really a breath of fresh air being able to see that through some of these socials. But that, as I mentioned, that's what I've seen. What I'd love to get your take on and what I'd love to hear from you is, what's the B side to that?
Great. Well, thank you very much for having me.
You're very welcome.
So yeah, as you said, I've kind of got a career in marketing, but I originally started back in the UK. I'm from a small little town called Dover. I grew up on the seaside with big dreams to get out of that town, I have to say. God love my family who are still there. But no, absolutely moved here 8 years ago. Have never been to Australia before. Booked a one-way ticket, kept applying for jobs and wouldn't kind of rest until I got one. And kind of landed on my feet when I got here, really, and have loved it. So I'm now an Australian citizen. I'm a keen ocean swimmer, so I chucked myself straight in the ocean as soon as I got here and joined a swim club. They're now my family here.
Yeah, wow.
They're absolutely amazing. And now I have a lovely partner. I live on the northern beaches and we've got 2 kelpies. So that's definitely me outside of work. Very active, lots of energy, and I'd like to bring that into the workplace too.
And what fills your cup?
Definitely a nice ocean swim at 6:30. That's when you get in. It's quite peaceful. All the weight's lifted off the body.
Yeah.
You can sort of float around. And then I love nothing more than having a coffee with my best friend afterwards. So he's a ridiculously fast swimmer. So I spend half an hour trying to keep up. I have to wear my fins and then we can just sit and drink and have a chat afterwards and talk about the world.
And I can imagine the journey from Dover
To Balmoral Beach.
Yeah, to Balmoral Beach was not necessarily the smoothest of pathways, having moved overseas myself at a point in my career. How did that play out, particularly deciding to lift and shift your entire life here?
Yeah, so I remember being sat in one of the cubicle desks at Johnson & Johnson and the girl opposite me said, "Oh, I'm going to move to Australia." And I thought, "Oh, that sounds good." I had a little look at that, some sunshine, have a little Google. I was like, "I like the beach. I like the sunshine. Yeah, I'm going to give that a go." And I started looking at plans of sort of how to get there and how to get jobs and realised it was quite difficult. And then actually at the time, my mum was diagnosed with breast cancer. So I actually had to put that on hold for about a year.
She's okay?
She's good.
Great.
She's in remission. So I had to wait for like a year and kind of go through that process. And then once she kind of got the all clear was when she told me that day, I was like, well, I'm actually going to move to Australia. And she was like, what? That's crazy. But yeah, so everyone else that around me was doing it, I guess, was going or trying to get a job with Johnson & Johnson. But I wasn't lucky enough to be able to transfer with them at the time. They didn't have any roles going. So I just tried to get in contact with some recruiters on the Australian side. We had the internet at that point, so it was great. I was reaching out to people on LinkedIn, trying to get into recruitment firms, trying to apply for jobs directly. Yeah. But I tried to get jobs in Coca-Cola or kind of food. And I was working in pharmaceuticals at the time. And I actually almost got a job with Goodman Fielder. They were one of the ones who were in my interview list. But then I decided to apply a bit closer in the pharmaceutical space and was lucky enough to get a job with Sanofi. But that was 4 days before my flight. So I just decided that I was going to fly anyway. I'll pack 2 bags and see what happens when I land. And within landing, I had the job. I'd found a house share within 5 days and I was in employment the following week. So it all worked pretty quickly. But I do love a plan. Yeah.
So we're here talking about the unfiltered versions of ourselves. And I'd love to start there if that's okay. Why do you think that so many of us, professional or personally speaking, feel the need to put on masks and hide our authentic selves?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. And I would say it's probably learned behavior more than anything else.
Explain.
So if I reflect back to my marketing manager when I was working in the UK and I was a graduate coming in and I was observing their behaviors in how they were communicating or what they would share in meetings. You didn't really know much about their personal lives and everything was all work really in terms of your deliverables. And I even remember sitting back as a grad thinking how unapproachable that boss was. She was leading and running the team and I'd be terrified to go and talk to her. And so I think when you've been around that behavior and you're seeing that you see them in a successful role, so then you potentially start to mirror some of that behavior. And I think, unfortunately, that's still alive and well today.
What do you think the antidote to that is?
I think it's about being true to yourself in who you are and understanding how you might want to lead or where you might want to go. So one of the best mentors I had was Rowena Millward through my marketing academy journey. And she talked about knowing yourself to grow yourself. So how do you look within to understand who you are and then build that out and then really showcase in the workplace?
We're going to touch on mentoring, but
yes.
I would love to ask then, having walked that path, if I were to ask your colleagues or people that might know you better than the cosmetic version, what would they say your style of leadership is?
Yeah, so they would definitely say I've been described as having a large motor. So I'm able to carry a lot of work and get a lot of shit done. So I'm definitely someone who's very determined, but I'm very honest. And I'm also very brave.
Okay.
So those two things in a room together can mean I'm opinionated.
You're in good company.
But it does mean that I stand up for kind of what I believe in and I'm always willing to kind of stick my neck out. And that goes for talking on behalf of people who might not feel so confident to share something or kind of being the voice of the people when I'm talking to upper leadership in where culture's at and how we might want to address some of those bits and pieces. So, but they would definitely, describe me as hardworking, results driven and very determined.
And is that something that you've actively cultivated or do you think that that a style like that is just organic? It's deeply wired into you.
That's definitely organic and deeply wired. Even as a child growing up, I was very independent. I'll be the first to volunteer for anything at school. I was always working to get out of Dover, doing quite well at school. And I'd always be, it's definitely hardwired.
But I assume that there's been a process to really bring, you mentioned, the mentorship through the Marketing Academy, that there's been a vehicle for you to sort of land there with confidence that that's who you are as a practitioner.
Yeah, I've been very lucky enough, particularly when I've worked in some of the big food companies, to go on leadership programs. And I formed this really lovely relationship with one of the coaches on this leadership program. And we really kind of used some tools to sort of delve into my mindset. And we uncovered that I'm such a high achiever mindset. So with that, it's a great strength, right? Because I look for success and I'm always about forward momentum. But with that comes a shadow in that I'm only as good as my next task or my next project. And we were kind of working through that and I kept getting feedback from people in the business because I was trying to get to the next level. And they were sort of saying, you need to improve your emotional intelligence. You need to start building your empathy. And I'm like, what of these words that people are talking about. What do you mean empathy? We're here to do a job, we're here to work hard. And I kept kind of hearing this and working with the coach. And we actually talked about, well, maybe it's actually rooted back more in children and kind of what happened growing up and all these sorts of things. So I actually went and saw a counsellor and kind of unpacked that side of myself to kind of really get under the skin. So I tried to obviously do it within the professional piece through feedback and tried to develop myself. But I realised that actually I needed to go and talk about lots more other areas to basically then be able to really remove my mask.
Yeah, well, I find that fascinating. And I think that is an incredibly brave journey to have gone on, where the professional and the personal are not as compartmentalized as we think they are. And for you to be able to probably, stand up against the black mirror and go, well, look, actually, I need to unpack things that are sitting probably a little bit more deeply rooted and anchored outside of my professional life. Where did that land? What were the benefits that you saw off the back of that?
Yeah, it was pretty amazing, really. It kind of really, for me, I went to see the counsellor just before I got into the marketing academy. So I kind of really had this grounding of who I was, what drove me, what had been and gone. And as soon as I walked out of some of those sessions, I was able to change things that I'd never really been able to change before. So I managed to get rid of some really bad habits. I used to be a smoker. I used to drink quite a lot. I used to go out partying. I kind of just stopped all of that and really just went, what fills my cup? Hey, I'm going to do a lot more of that. And then in the workplace, it just made me more aware of my impact on others, or all of these soft skills that I was being told to kind of improve and shape. And then kind of gave me confidence to be able to go, well, I'm working on these things. I can apply for these other jobs. And so then when I went into the marketing academy, I was so ready to be open and vulnerable and kind of really keep addressing some of those pieces. And I remember Sherilyn, the founder of the marketing academy, actually saying to me after one session that she taught through the Living Leader, you're a lot further on your journey than I see some others in this room today. Would you please go and talk to some of those others and act as a bit of a spearhead in how you might address some of those? So she even recognised that kind of in a room of people.
Probably why she's thrown you in to the deep end
Yes.
with this.
Yeah.
And so what would be your advice if there are some practitioners or some professionals listening in or watching this that are going, yep, I'm buying what you're selling, but I just don't know what the first step looks like. How do you start going inward to travel outward?
Yeah, so I think I did it from the perspective of I kept hearing the same feedback, and I couldn't crack it. And maybe a coach or a mentor isn't the right person to help you crack it. So then who else can you ask? You can talk to a lot of your friends about this, but they're also biased because they half like you, right? You'd hope so. So actually just, if you keep hearing this niggle that you keep applying for these jobs and you're technically sound, but they're telling you you're not getting there because your soft skills aren't there, maybe that's when you need to dig a little bit deeper and try and move those along.
One of the things that's come up in a couple of episodes as we've been discussing, the support networks that great leaders require is community, and this bench, this well of insight and support to draw from. I'd love to get your take. How have you cultivated a community of practice, so to speak? Be it everything from, mentorship through to coaching and formal counselling.
So it started with that coach and the leadership, and I was like, wow, this is really impactful. That was my first kind of experience of that program. And then I went and saw the counsellor and had my 10 prescribed sessions, and that was really great. And then through the marketing academy, I've really learnt the power of community, and that's where you get access to the 8 mentors. You then get your coach. I became very good friends with my coach. We're actually very similar. We both like the same sporting pieces. We still connect every now and then. Now I check in on her.
Swimming is a real inroad into the world.
Swimming is also another amazing community. But yes, I still connect with my coach. So she's amazing. And then the Marketing Academy was a huge opener in the power of community. So you're thrown into a cohort with 29 other people who are in the same mindset as you. That's absolutely massive. So I'm definitely proud to call at least 6 of them like my new BFFs. They're just the network I didn't have. And you can have access to Sherilyn, you can have access to this massive network. And so I think from that, I've really branched out to try and build more communities and connect with lots more people in the industry, which has been great.
Beyond the community, I'd love to understand what your philosophy is to ongoing learning. Right? I think another hallmark of really brilliant leaders is that, you know, the job is never done, the work is never done in terms of sharpening the axe.
Yeah.
What do you bring in terms of a philosophy for ongoing learning?
Yeah, so curiosity is definitely one of my key areas of interest too, in terms of my team are really important to me and how we bring curiosity. So I like to craft an environment where they look beyond their immediate scope, and then we create the space for them to bring in new bits and pieces. So, you know, kind of out of the box thinking. I've got some quite young people in my team too, and I learn way more from them than I'm probably giving to them in terms of all the tech and the social environments that they bring. I love to read, but not long pieces. They've got to be short, snappy. Like I love a written article. Yep. You know, I'm all over Borough Sharp. I like to use our agency partners too to bring in kind of fresh thinking and trends. But I think one of the best areas I've learned is when building a team. In one of my previous roles, I actually hired 2 non-marketers to come and be in the marketing team. So one would come from commercial and finance and the other one would come from sales. And it was one of the best teams I've had because from a technical point of view, I felt I could coach and bring them up to speed and show them the world of marketing. And they really wanted to get into marketing. And for me, you can kind of teach anything, right? If you're willing to learn it. So they taught me heaps because they just brought so many different perspectives and skills, and we just worked so well as a team together. So I quite like to do different things like that, like give people a chance to get into the industry, because more often than not, you lose out on jobs, right? Because you don't tick all the boxes. But I'm all for giving people a shot if they just want to do the job.
I love that. And I think more and more I feel as though we're going to see hiring practice shift towards mental agility and mental stretchiness versus have you done this job for 5 years before?
I really hope so.
Yeah. You mentioned reverse mentorship, which I think is something that we tend to undervalue, particularly as senior professionals. I'd love to hear an example of where someone that was considerably more junior with you just illuminated something and was able to mentor you in a particular set of circumstances.
Yeah, I wouldn't say this particular example, she was necessarily junior, but she was working for CBA, so mentoring as part of the Marketing Academy CBA connection. And we were having a conversation about her role, and she was talking about her marketing sphere and space, and she was sort of saying how she covers this much of the marketing mix, but you know, kind of at FMCG you sort of cover the breadth. And we were having a really great chat, and she was like, oh yeah, I teach at UNSW and I do subjects on innovation. I was like, sorry, like you're a lecturer and you work? And I always thought you had to make a choice. And she was the one who actually connected me with UNSW, so I've always had interest in teaching. She was like, yeah, it's really easy, you pick a module, you can go and teach. So through that, she connected me, and kind of I'm on the list basically to become a casual lecturer. And I never would have thought it was that easy had she not given me lots back in that while we were there to essentially help her and give her perspective.
And how are you finding lecturing?
Haven't started yet.
Oh,
so I was going to do term 1. I'm going to do term 2. I'll come back and talk about that.
The busy podcast schedule has gotten in the way of lecturing.
Yes, pretty much.
When have you gotten it wrong?
I'm sure we all get it wrong all the time.
Of course.
So I think marketing is so ambiguous and so is strategy that we get it wrong all the time. And if I think about any other function in the business, everyone is a closet marketer. So I think the probably the right question to ask is, do we ever get it right? Really?
Oh, okay.
Probably more so. But I think if you're focused on doing the basics well, getting stuff out the door, I think that's heaps better than striving for perfection and trying to get it 100% right. And that's definitely the philosophy that we kind of have at my current place, in terms of like, let's just get stuff going and then let's just learn about it. But one of the big observations I have had coming from really big business is when you don't allow for getting it wrong. So I've worked in so many big process-driven organizations where there is no margin for error, But then it also means there's no margin for excitement or being able to take you down a path that you didn't know existed. And I'm very fortunate now in my role where we're creating a category. There is no rule book. There is no one has been able to do
It's
this
the
before.
Wild West. You're
It
pioneers.
is. And so we've got to get it wrong and right all the time. But I think now we're under so much scrutiny. That last week opened LinkedIn and someone I'd never met before had reviewed my packaging change that's just gone live in market. So it was an old pack up next to a new pack. Luckily, he was reviewing it with positivity and commending it. But of course, there was lots of comments underneath that weren't so positive. And so I don't think we can do anything without being scrutinised these days and getting it wrong.
Particularly amongst your team where they might have been, the up-and-coming professional that worked on that packaging change. And how do you build resilience in those team members, knowing that they might read the comments and may have not walked the same path and had the same benefit of mentorship and an ongoing education? What do you do to help keep their eyes to the sky?
Yeah, so we definitely reviewed that packaging piece together, and we definitely have the mindset as a team of evolution. So we moved from one step to another, and now we'll look at evolution too. And so we'll talk about some of those changes. Do we want to think about those? Do we want to integrate those? And so I just think, particularly with the team, I like to instill the mindset that you're never going to get it perfect. So just get it to 70%. And then let's go, and then let's reiterate and learn. And I think we just discuss and talk about all of those all the time.
Progression over perfection.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
On the other side of the coin, you mentioned the increasing expectations, particularly on senior marketers. I'd love to unpack that a little bit. How do you see the role of senior marketers shifting, given we are in an ecology of 1,000,001 different metrics and data points and systems and processes? And how do you go about navigating what from the outside looking in, constantly shifting goalposts?
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I'd be keen to hear your perspective on this as well. I think it's only going to get more ambiguous. And so I kind of like to take the approach of I'll proof out what I can proof out, but then I'll believe in what I can't. And so how do you build that mentality in terms of whatever you're then looking at? So we've got loads of data coming, lots of technical change. Our scope is ever increasing. I'm being asked all the time as a marketer, can you give me answers to this? Can you give me answers to that? So we're just getting more and more in terms of being a generalist. And I think you just have to go with the times, see where the business energy is at, but also being able to adapt, I think, is one of those key skills that we do need, and keep on top of the trends and keep curious and keep bringing those pieces in, but also be brave enough to say, hey, I don't know the answer to this, but I can go and find out, or I can build something that's slightly different, but I don't know if the fundamentals are really going to change that much of actually how you do marketing. I believe in doing the basics really well and then having a bit of fun and having a bit of test and learn on the side.
Yep, I would agree. I think to answer the return serve, I think that in our pursuit of measurement, we often discount the most powerful of the marketing levers, which are often either intangible or a slightly slower burn. And I worry that in the distillery and the brilliant team that I'm very privileged to lead, we spend most of our time unpacking what's going on underneath the hood of the consumer, and often those mindset shifts, or how we're litigating our choices, the stuff that really matters to marketers, you can't measure.
Yeah.
And the role of affinity and community and these things that where a lot more of the decisions are being made, they're happening in ecosystems and ecologies that aren't being measured. They're happening hopefully outside of digital ecologies. And I think that there is a level of short-termism that is suffocating marketing as a craft. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah.
But what we hope to do, is provide the antidote to that, to provide, a consumer-led rationalization for those leaps of faith. Why are we doing this? So that you can go to a CFO and say, look, here's what consumers are saying. I fundamentally believe that The antidote to that short-termism is platforming the voice of the consumer, right? You can't measure necessarily the outcome of that, with one exception. In downstream sales, we forget that there is actually one measure of success, and that's, are we selling more products or creating longer lifetime value? But I think that the antidote is bringing the voice of the customer to the fore, like unapologetic customer advocacy. And if you're operating in pursuit of customer delight or customer success, then hopefully you can convince the CFO sometimes.
Yeah. Get them on board early.
Yeah. I want to shift gears a little bit and look at the road ahead, if I might. How do you think the critical skills required of marketing leaders is going to shift over the next 5-10 years? Beyond, and I would agree with you, I think the fundamentals, brands and marketers and businesses often get caught up in new news. It's one of the things that we see a lot, And in our fixation on what's the new thing I can take to the CEO or what's the new thing I can take to the board, we forget that our consumers move at a glacial pace relative to how quickly we think as marketers. So I'm absolutely in the camp with you of the brilliant basics I don't think are going to change for the foreseeable future. But if I was starting my marketing career now and I was looking to follow in your footsteps, what would you say the critical skills that I would need to develop and curate would be?
So I think strategy probably is one of those that's sort of underdone from a skill set point of view.
Okay. What do you mean by that? Because strategy is one of those,
very
incredibly obtuse,
yes,
overused. It's everything from the time value of money through to net present values through to consumer. Yeah. When you say strategy, what do you mean?
So when I say strategy, I mean, what's your business strategy? Because more often than not, marketing are having those conversations in how the whole business shows up, but then also how you then go to market with your brand. So what's your competitive difference or your competitive advantage, or what do you stand for in the market? Certainly what I see, and maybe that's because I've gone from working in very established categories to startup land at the moment, the categories are so cluttered and complex. And I think the barriers to entry of people starting their own businesses have just become less and less. So I think competition is only ever going to increase in whatever area you're going to try and get into. And therefore, for me, strategy becomes more like the most important thing.
How you cut through the clutter.
Because once you've got your strategy, you then can rally all of your people behind that. So if I was saying advice to my younger self, it would be definitely get the strategy skills, definitely get the financial skills and know how to measure what you do and when you can't, just believe in the intangible pieces. But then how you rally your people behind that direction, I think, is really key. And I didn't really understand the power of that kind of direction and vision until I joined this startup and saw kind of everybody working on their own different pieces and how you really bring them together. And I wish I'd done a lot more in starting my career, unpacking these softer skills in terms of how you front up in the workplace. So how do you build curiosity? How do you be brave? How do you build resilience? How do you deal with different types of people, so execs right through to grads who are coming through the door? I don't think you start really unpacking those things until you're 10 years into your career, because it's stopping you getting to CMO or an exec suite role, rather than when you're actually entering the workforce.
How do you build bravery?
How do you build bravery? Yeah, that is a very, very good question. I'm definitely keen to hear your perspective on this skill, and I know you've been studying bravery for the past year. I think in terms of bravery, I think it starts with, certainly in my view, what's the worst thing that can happen if I do this? And some people might see that as catastrophizing. I see that as like planning for the worst. Like, if the worst thing happened, could I deal with it? And would I know what to do with that? And then just build up from there. But I think there's so much that you miss out on by not doing those things. If you just go, no, I can't do that. I don't want to try that. And I see that a lot with my team, where I currently am, in terms of I spend most of my time building confidence in my team to try things, to do things, to give things a go. And if you don't know how to do something in one way, why not build 3 ways? How do you start to build some of those pieces to then be able to be brave. Like, give yourself the back skills.
I want to double click on this. Okay, because I love the idea of what are the things that we really do as a leader these days. So you've touched on building confidence.
Yeah.
What is it? What else is it? You know, in terms of, call it what you do to cultivate an exceptional culture. But, you know, as a senior marketer, fundamentally, when I call what I call a home game, right? You've got the away game, what you're doing for consumers, and then you've got what you're doing for your team. As a CMO or a head of marketing, what are you in the business of when it comes to your home game beyond just building confidence?
Yeah, so with my immediate team, it's finding what they wanted, right? And they told me that they wanted open, kind of approachable, and an honest working relationship. Now, I think that's really impactful, right? In terms of they're telling me that they want that. I'm extremely honest, I'm extremely open, but we create that space where they can tell me anything, warts and all. They can tell me they're having a really bad day. They can tell me they're having a really great day. We can talk about all of the bits and pieces that are really bothering them. But because we can talk about it openly and honestly, we can just work through it a lot quicker. And if I think back to, 15 years ago when I first started, there is no way I could have had that relationship with my boss. I don't even think I have that relationship with people above me necessarily. So I try and create that real safe space, because when you create that safe space, that's when the magic happens. That's when you can really start challenging each other and giving feedback to each other and really growing each other together. And that's how I like to lead the team in that regard.
What's the sting in the tail, though, with that approach, if you were to call one out?
It can be too honest, right? So you
Okay.
can get caught, I think, in the negative spiral. So if they're having a bad
Sitting in the
time,
problem.
yes, sitting in the problem, not working through it, and then keep going over it and over it. But you've got to be able to get them out of that and give them the perspective and go, yeah, that's just today. Let's move forward.
Okay. I'm sure you would agree that the future of marketing is looking a little bit more tumultuous, to your point. There's 1,000,001 different systems and processes we're going to have to keep across. What do you think the watch outs are for up and coming marketers in terms of preparing themselves for a future that is less certain and more tumultuous?
That's a tough one.
I'm glad we finally got it done.
So preparing themselves, I think they need to prepare themselves to be able to thrive in change. And then how you deal with that, whether you're contributing yourself in that change environment or whether you're actually leading a team through that change environment, I think is really key. And then how you still build growth and results against that change, and you still keep learning along the way. So I think curiosity and definitely dealing with change would be the skills. What are your thoughts?
I would agree. I'd push it a little further, and I think Nirvana for me looks like having a team that is energized by change. It's a subtle difference, but I think hiring people for, there is a way that you can frame, the catharsis of new, and I think that needs to be complemented by moments of stillness. But I think that there is a certain type of culture where we have a mantra in the team called embrace the pivot, right? So you can imagine where, we're doing a big piece exploring youthfulness or bravery. And then our stakeholders catch wind, or an industry goes, oh, we'd love, could we expand the scope of this? Or the goalposts shift, right? It was going to be used for this application and we need to now shift it and use it for this application. Or we've been asked for strategic guidance on something that's slightly different. And through one pathway is, but we've set the program like this. The other is that we've been given an amazing opportunity to increase the impact of the work that we do. And so one of the things that we try to do is reframe when there is change, it's an opportunity for us to deliver transcendent impact in the work that we do. And I think that comes from I'm a staunch believer in mental agility, particularly when it comes to changing minds, right? We were earlier in the season speaking to another TMA alum, particularly around the stigma that we associate with people changing minds, right? Politicians are a great example. God forbid that, they should change their mind on better information. But what a privilege for us to be at the forefront of changing someone's mind. And I think where the goalposts shift, or we have better information, or we have new technology, if it helps us sharpen our axe, we actively focus on leaning into that and embracing that pivot. And I think you can hire for that, right? There's some amazing tools and toolkits to be able to screen for mental stretchiness, for mental agility. That's sort of the philosophy that we've brought in amongst the teams that I've led.
Yeah, one of our values is champions of change.
Yeah.
To try and really promote that behaviour internally, because our landscape is always changing. A category that's only 4 years old, there is a lot of change going on.
And I think it would be remiss for me not to ask you about purpose, because I think you operate in a really brilliant space. So for those that don't know, you are leading the change towards, plant-based proteins, which, is a fundamental shift for a lot of Australians. You and I were even talking about my meat intake earlier today. How does purpose-led work play out in your world, and I think purpose is often, it's been the flavor of the month, and I think we're starting to see a little bit of brand blowback in terms of purpose washing. But closer to home, as someone that's really walking the talk on this, I'd love to get your take on, both how you see it used as an enricher of professional life, but also where we may be hiding behind it, filtering ourselves and maybe misusing it as a commercial lever.
Yes, two very big questions there. So I'll tackle the
Let's go
personal,
the former.
professional one first. So I think I've always really enjoyed working for organisations who make a positive impact. So even though I worked in big pharma, I was actually making a difference. I was working on a stop smoking brand. I was working on digestive health. I was actually making a difference to somebody else's life. And then obviously working for Mars, they're kind of very purpose driven in what they do. They've got lots of great things where they partner with Food Bank, and they're growing the reef back in some of their other brands. And you get a lot of excitement for actually being able to demonstrate a real impact. And that was one of the catalysts for me going over into the plant-based space. So personally, I just started dating a vegetarian 4 years ago who was very much doing it for animal welfare reasons, absolutely loves the animals. And I just couldn't believe that you'd want to give up all of this tasty meat, to save a pig or a chicken you've never even met or never going to meet. But I really saw the major impact of that, and then started to sort of adopt the lifestyle and realized how easy that could be. And then when I met the team at V2 and they sort of told me about the mission and the vision and the journey and the why, I was like, wow, this is super interesting. This is a whole business sort of founded on purpose, whereas I'd worked for businesses who were all about profit and then, tacked on purpose. So this was, we are founded on feeding the planet in a way that takes care of the planet, very sustainably driven. And I think how that translates internally is we're always asking our question of, well, what does success look like in that regard? Because you're talking about, trying to change all of the population's eating habits. But actually, all we really want to do is displace one meat meal at a time. Like if you break it down on its little, small nuance, which is where our campaign Update Your Plate came from, just trying to get people to make one small change that then ladders up to a big, significant piece. So for me, that was really great just to know that we're making that big impact, but it's hard. It's very hard. It's a very hard category, very hard space. It's definitely not easy. We've got about 1 in 10 people in Australia right now who are buying into the category and choosing a plant-based, but everybody is somewhere on that journey. Everyone knows they're going to get there eventually. It's just about a matter of when and not if. I just don't think I could do that. I think you've got to then go with where your values are. And I'm really loving working in a space. I am the consumer that we're going after. I do have given up my meat, or I'm on a journey. I do eat some meat. So I think it's really going to limit where I can go.
But the juice is worth the squeeze. Hey?
Absolutely. Plenty more startups, I'm sure, in the plant-based space.
What I'd love to end on, and you've touched on it at different points, but I'm hoping that we can wrap it in a nice bow. If you could go back to 20-year-old Jade and give her 3 pieces of advice that are going to set her up for success as a marketing leader and practitioner, over the next few years? What advice would you give yourself?
So I would encourage to be the agitator more so than I already am, believe it or not. I think, but doing it with real curiosity and respect. So not mirroring the behavior that you may see above, but really doing it authentically and respectfully, and kind of building a new way to be able to be an agitator rather than...
Bravery anchored in curiosity.
Yes.
Yep.
Experience. So get more experience than just marketing. So I would go...
Interesting.
Yes.
Why?
So I would go broader so that you have more of an understanding around how the rest of the business works. Marketing is all about influencing, whether you're influencing consumers, but more often than not, 95% of my job is influencing internally. Influencing consumers is the fun part, right? Which is the marketing
and often
piece.
the easy part.
Yeah. You make an ad and off you go.
Yeah.
But internally is the influencing. So if you can demonstrate your ability to understand how the business operates and works, I think that's going to set you apart from everyone else. And then I think the third piece is just around the measurement piece. So really getting into that data, really making friends with the person in finance and understanding the financial impacts that marketing has on the whole P&L and understanding the business, but then being comfortable with what you can and can't measure.
I think that's sage wisdom.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. I've really, really enjoyed this conversation, and I think you've been very generous with your time and with your counsel. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.